Thank you again so much for everybody for joining us this afternoon for our fourth webinar in our series, Mapping Your NGSS Assessment Strategy. Today, we're going to be talking all about common unit assessments. Thank you to those of you who would introduce yourselves in the chat. Daniel and I will go ahead and return the favor and introduce ourselves. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her. Prior to InterOrbit, I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years here in Minnesota. And during that time, I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem, honors chem. So lots of different ways to teach a lot of different kids. I worked a lot with the NGSS within my time in the classroom. I got to be a PLC lead for a data-driven dialogue. And now I have the pleasure of partnering with districts to help them pilot and implement InterOrbit. And while I am sad that summer is ending, one thing I always look forward to in the fall is going to the Renaissance Festival. So that's one thing I try to remind myself is, okay, while it is starting to be more fallish, that does mean I get to go to the Ren Fair. So that helps a little bit. And then I'll go ahead and pass it off to Daniel.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Jackson. Before joining InterOrbit, I was a curriculum director, high school biology teacher, and middle school science teacher for about 11 years in education. I taught at an international school in Colombia. I was a global education and Fulbright TGC scholar in Morocco, and I currently partner with school leaders and teachers new to InterOrbit. Because I am holding on to summer a little bit, and we do have a summer tradition with my cousins, we try to get as many of us to go to Cedar Point at least one time in the summer. So that's still on the list of things to do before summer ends in September, at the end of September. So technically, summer, we have several weeks left.
I like that mindset. Just make it last longer because you want to. All right. So today, our goal is that we're going to just explore unit assessments as a common science assessment strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about the purpose behind unit assessments. And then we're excited to give you an actual example of how a district implements common unit assessments across their district using InterOrbit. And then we'll give you an opportunity to actually make an account and start building your own unit assessments so you could start getting an idea of what that could look like. We'll be here for about an hour today. We're always going to start off with what is InterOrbit, just so you know what we are and who we do. Then we'll just talk about really broadly common assessment systems, the benefits of them, and then how to choose a strategy. Then we'll talk a little bit about 3D assessment structures, since we're all talking about NGSS assessments specifically. And then we'll get into unit assessments. So like I mentioned, we'll share a district example. And then we're going to end with a live workshop where you'll have an opportunity to make an InterOrbit demo account and then actually start building some unit assessments to see what those could look like for you. I will say, searching for GIFs about unit assessments on the internet was a little sparse in that way, but let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about InterOrbit so we can get to unit assessments. So for those of you who don't know, what is InterOrbit? We are an assessment platform. So we have over 10,000 different assessment items that are all aligned to novel phenomena that can be used to build high integrity 3D assessments, which then yield really detailed three-dimensional data. So you can actually make informed next steps on how to support students. And one of the things we really try to do here is make the NGSS accessible for both you and your students, by having innovative approaches to sense making and by providing different scaffolding and tools to make sure that everybody can be successful. And one of the ways we do that is by providing guidance, supporting resources, and PD, much like the webinar right here, to help you reach your NGSS goals. My colleague is going to go ahead and drop in the chat an interest form. So this is letting us know that you're potentially interested in piloting InterOrbit. Alicia, I know we're already chatting, so no worries. If you don't need to fill that out if you don't want to. But for anybody else who might come in later, we've got that in there if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Daniel, and he's going to talk a little bit more about just common assessment systems in general.
All right, let's dive into common assessment systems. Over the next couple of slides, we'll cover what common assessments are, why they matter, and a practical way to structure them for the NGSS. So what is a common assessment? Simply put, it's the same assessment given by teachers who teach the same content or grade level. The real purpose isn't just the test itself, it's the conversation that you all are able to have afterward, where teams look at the data together and respond to student needs. The goal is efficiency for you and equity for the students. And there are four big benefits here. They set clear, consistent expectations. They give you reliable data you can actually compare. They strengthen how your team work together. And they're a low-lift way to try something new. I have a quick question for you all. If you can drop in the chat, Which of these four does your team need the most right now? And we encourage you to use the chat throughout the session here. And if you're feeling more collaborative, later on we'll have some time for you to engage with each other during the workshop. But go ahead and put in the chat, one, two, three, or four. Which of those do you feel your team needs the most right now? I see a three. So that's strengthen collaboration and instructional growth. Certainly important. And it may be hard to choose because they're all important, but sometimes one kind of sticks out over the other one. But here, there's multiple types of assessments. So we can look at some of the few types that we are going to discuss. Common assessments come in a few types. There's growth assessments, curricular benchmarks, formative, and unit assessments. They mostly differ in scope and how often you give them. For example, formative assessments are quick and in the moment, while benchmark and growth assessments track progress over a longer arc. And it may not be necessary to have them all figured out all at once. It's best to start with one based on what your district or department needs. And the next slide will actually help you pick a starting point. So there's a flow chart here that will guide you to help you find the right starting point for your assessments. The easiest way is to ask yourself a couple questions. First, how often would it be most useful to receive data? And from there, what do you most need that data to tell you? Your answers will point you in one clear strategy to start with. And a lot of these approaches have overlap. So just committing to one vision and starting small is really what helps implementation stick. All right. And that's the foundation of the common assessments. So now we want to get into what actually makes a science assessment strong. And that means talking about the three-dimensional assessment. So the NGSS assessments are built on three dimensions. The DCI, which is the core content of the disciplinary core ideas. We have the CCCs, which are the cross-cutting concepts that show up across all of science. And the SEPs, which are the practices, what students are actually doing as scientists. And the whole point of the 3D is that students aren't actually just recalling facts, they're using practices and concepts together to make sense of phenomena. And this is where inner orbit comes in. We scaffold sense making by building questions at 1, 2, and 3 dimensions. So you can dial the rigor up or down. You might start lighter for a diagnostic and build all the way up to a full 3D for a summative. It lets you meet your students where they are and scaffold them towards real sense making. And I'm going to pass it over to Emily, who will explore unit assessments as a common science assessment strategy.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. So now that we've got a little bit of a basis for common assessments in general and NGSS assessments, let's talk specifically about unit assessments. So the definition of a unit assessment is a little obvious, but it's assessments aligned to a shared scope and sequence to be given throughout a unit. The purpose behind this is it can help give educators pre-built assessments so then they can work together to gather school and district student data to have those PLC conversations and those data-driven talks. There's a lot of different types of unit assessments, and that's what we're going to be spending some of our time today exploring. You can do unit diagnostics, unit formatives, unit summatives, or some combination of any of these. What this can look like is from an administrator or district level, you can pre-build these unit assessments. And then from there, depending on what your ultimate goals are, you can then talk about if you're going to go the diagnostic, the formative, or the summative route. So then you can collect that data to see, one, if your teachers are aligned to what they should be teaching, and two, you get that information on if students are progressing as they should throughout a unit. So this is kind of a zoomed in portion of that flow chart that Daniel was showing us a little bit earlier. Common unit assessments are a great strategy to pick when you want that consistent pulse on learning at the close of each unit. You're gathering data frequently, but you're not doing it so often that there's like an assessment fatigue, if you will. So you've got these natural instincts and these natural points to check in that feel normal within the unit without exhausting everybody within those assessments as well. Common unit assessments are also a great way to make sure that teachers are aligned. That's one of the benefits of giving common assessments. And it's not necessarily holding teachers into that lock and step. I know when I was in the classroom, that was a really big conversation in terms of wanting teachers to have that autonomy and that ability to do what they want to do. But when you really have these unit assessments focused on the standards, it's ensuring that all of your students are getting that equitable instruction in terms of making sure that they're getting the content, they're getting the SEPs, and they're getting the CCCs. And then it's bringing teachers together to then have those collaborative discussions. If one colleague's students are doing really well, it's a great opportunity to share out. If another colleague is struggling with a particular SEP and their students are struggling, it's a great opportunity to ask for that collaboration and that support. And then also, like I mentioned before, and this is what we're going to dive into, unit assessments can play that different role depending on what that driving question is that you and your PLC want to answer. So is it really important to know what they already know before you dive into a unit so you can meet them where they're at? Is it really important to know how the instruction is going so you can pivot as needed during instruction? Or is it important to make sure that students are mastering and are becoming proficient at the end of a unit? Or are all of them important? And so therefore we want to make sure we have room for all of them within our assessment system. And like Daniel mentioned earlier, a lot of these common assessment systems have a lot of clear overlap. So it's not necessarily about picking apart the nuances of the difference between the systems, but it's about picking a system and a vision that resonates with you and your needs so you can clearly communicate that vision to your team to ensure that this common assessment strategy is played out and done by everybody who's involved. So with that being said, I want to kind of paint a picture for you of what this actually looks like within a real district that uses InterOrbit to implement this common unit assessment system. So this particular account, they really wanted to make 3D aligned assessments and scoring more doable for teachers throughout an entire unit. So they really wanted that three-dimensional learning to be incorporated into the unit, and they wanted it to be really accessible for teachers by pre-building them. So they didn't want teachers getting stuck trying to make these rigorous three-dimensional assessments. They wanted them to be ready for them to use. They also wanted to ensure that they were getting results quickly so they could adjust instruction real time. So they wanted teachers to have as much detailed data as possible and as fast as possible so they could then pivot as needed. And then they really wanted to make sure, again, that everything was aligned. So they were getting that consistent view that regardless of the school site, the teacher, the grade level band, that students were getting that instruction that they needed, so then they can move on to that next step. And this district in particular, this was a large district, or is a large district, of over 15,000 students in an urban area within Connecticut. And like we mentioned, they were doing unit assessments, and they decided to do unit assessments at the beginning, the middle, and at the end. So one of the things that was really important with this, because it was such a large district, is that alignment. So they wanted to ensure that across multiple school sites and across multiple teachers, that those teachers were teaching to the standards and were making sure that they were hitting all three of those dimensions. And like I also mentioned, they took that lift off of teachers by pre-building them. So within InterOrbit, they had two different folders, a middle school folder and a high school folder. And then from there, teachers could select the grade level band they were teaching. And then from there, they were broken down by unit. So then once teachers selected the unit they were teaching, then they would see these different folders for pre-assessments, common formative assessments, and end of unit assessments. And it was the expectation that you would give these assessments at different points to then come back and facilitate PLC discussions. And I'll show you an example of what some of that data looks like too, and how they ensure those PLC discussions are being facilitated as well. But a little bit more about the actual assessments. So the pre-assessments, they wanted really clear guidelines for what the goal of those assessments were. So everybody was on the same page. So for the pre-assessments, they really wanted to answer the question, what do students already know? For those mid-unit checks, those formatives, they really wanted to answer the question, what do I need to adjust in instruction? And then for the end of unit or the summatives, they wanted to answer, what changes do I need to make moving forward? So are there some skills that are building up on one another? Is this something that we need to revisit the next time we teach this, etc.? So the way that they ensured they were meeting these goals is, the first thing is how they built the assessments. So their pre-assessments were built with prior knowledge one-dimensional questions and core content one-dimensional questions. So these questions are DCI only, content only. Prior knowledge is looking at knowledge from an earlier grade level band, and core content is looking at knowledge from that grade level band. What's nice about having a mix of these is, one, you're ensuring that they know previous content, but also you're kind of figuring out where that content may stop because they might have some understanding of that current grade level content. So you can kind of get that gauge of what might need to be retaught, what do they already know, what needs to be reinforced, etc., before you actually dive in and start teaching. The common formative assessments had a structure of having one-dimensional core content questions, two-dimensional CCC or cross-cutting concept questions, two-dimensional SEP questions, and then three-dimensional sense-making questions. The purpose of these assessments was to kind of get the whole picture. So how are students doing from simple one-dimensional all the way to 3D sense-making? By having that entire picture, they could then identify where there was a potential gap in knowledge. For example, maybe they're doing really well on the 1D questions, really well on the 2D CCC, and now there's a drop in the two-dimensional SEP. So that would inform me as an educator that maybe I need to adjust my instruction to make sure that I'm more explicitly supporting and teaching the science and engineering practice. I'm incorporating more modeling. I'm incorporating more analyzing, interpreting data, etc. And then with that information, now you can adjust that instruction. And then at the end of the unit, you can see if that mastery or if that proficiency was met. With that end of unit assessment, they purposely just picked two-dimensional and three-dimensional questions because as identified by the NGSS, proficiency is mastering all dimensions of the standard, which would be three-dimensional. What's helpful with the two-dimensional questions, though, is it gives you that insight still of where there may need to be more support. Because if you give all three-dimensional questions, it can be hard to parse out what part of the question might have been more challenging. But by interspersing some two-dimensional questions, it can better guide those next steps in terms of supporting students in future units or just helping support them throughout their entire science career. So for their common unit assessments, there was 3 different types that had to be given throughout the unit across the district. I wanted to show you a little bit about what that actually looked like, what an assessment actually looked like on the teacher's end. So this is an example of a common formative assessment. So as a reminder, the common formative assessment has 5 questions. So the one-dimensional, the two-dimensional CCC, the two-dimensional SEP, and the three-dimensional question. On Inner Orbit, all of our questions are tied to novel phenomena. So students are going to have to transfer what they've been learning and apply it to something that they have not seen before. So how could a bucket light up your life? And then from there, you can not only see how they're doing on the content and the skills and the practices, but you can also see how they're doing on transferring. Because if you're constantly relying on the anchoring phenomena or those examples that are given within the curriculum, you can never know if students are truly able to transfer and apply that to something new, which is what these inner orbit assessments kind of allow as an opportunity to do. So after giving a common formative assessment, what this district then does is teachers then take this information and take this data and then bring it back to their PLCs to discuss. I also wanted to show you what some of the data looks like on the district end as well, because while this is informing teacher instruction, this is also really valuable in informing district administrators on where additional support and resources may need to go to. So within this district, they have a really strict data chat protocol. So you need to start with evidence, and then from there, you need to name a priority need, and then you need to agree on an action plan. And having been in lots of PLC data chats, sometimes you just get really into the naming, starting with the evidence part. Like there's so much data to look at, and you spend so much time with that. But having this really clear structure ensures that that conversation has momentum and actually leads to those next steps. What I have here is this is actually an example of a district level report. So what this is showing is up here are all of the SEPs, all the science and engineering practices. And along here would be the different school sites within the district. Like I mentioned, this was a larger district. So what's interesting about this report from a district level is you can kind of apply that same PLC data chat protocol of starting with evidence, name a need, and agree on an action plan. Because now that you have this over top view of the data, you can then give the supports as needed that your team might need. For example, maybe we'll note that asking questions and defining problems is by far, not by far, but is the lowest performing SEP. So then what you can do on Inner Orbit, which is nice, is you can drill down even deeper. So now down here, we can actually see how different grade level bands are doing with that SCP. And it looks like elementary is actually doing really well. High school's doing okay, but it actually looks like the gap might be taking place within the middle school. And then what's interesting from there is you can drill down even deeper within those PLC conversations. Because, for example, here, this 77.7% is on a two-dimensional SCP question because we've got the orange and the blue here. So maybe there are some school sites that are performing a little bit better with this. Maybe there's some teachers who are performing better. So when you can drill down to this level of detail, you can actually highlight some best practices. You can share this out with the entire district, and you can make that more collaborative environment possible. And these questions here are some of the questions that are often facilitated within that PLC discussion as well. So what does the data suggest we should do next? Where are students getting stuck and what support will help? And what's one change we'll make in instruction starting tomorrow? I really love that one because sometimes the changes can feel so big and so intense. But really, sometimes you can just tweak a little thing tomorrow. Maybe throw a question up on the board as a bell ringer and ask students to look at this and think, pair, share with their neighbor. So having these kind of set protocols within this assessment system to look at the data can ensure that those next steps are actually being taken. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is just some insights that this district shared as a result of this common assessment system. So the teachers shared that they felt like they were to quickly move from results to responses. So by getting that frequent data and having those conversations, they were actually able to make that instructional change. They also had more time to focus on targeted instruction because that lift of building the assessments was taken off of them by having the pre-built district assessments. And then they were able to better pinpoint those whole class moves and that targeted small group support. And that was the other nice thing. When you kind of have somebody else building the assessments, it kind of takes out the, I wrote this question, and you can really focus more on the data and not the test. So you've got the data in front of you. What are we going to do as a result of this data? And then on the student end, they noticed a growing confidence with sense making, wider engagement, and students were using science language more often in peer conversations because they were exposed to these three-dimensional phenomena-based NGSS assessments more often. And the kids are more involved because they feel more supported. When teachers are constantly getting this data and then responding directly as a result of the data, the students can see, okay, they're actually here to help me. They saw that something needed to be shifted and changed, and I'm feeling supported in my journey as a result of that as well. Just to leave you with some parting thoughts here, if you are interested in piloting InterOrbit, we're going to go ahead and drop another link in the chat. This is just a interest form. So it's letting us know this is something that you're interested in, and it puts you into contact with somebody on our team. So we can answer any questions that you have and help you potentially get started if that's something that you want to try out, whether it's in your classroom or your entire school or district. We post all of our webinars to our YouTube channel. So feel free to go ahead and check us out or subscribe if you want to see these consistent webinars that we do. And if you've got any questions, you are always free to email us at inquiries@interorbit.com, and we're happy to help. It was so wonderful working with all of you today. I hope that we were able to give you some ideas or insights or inspiration for how to tackle NGSS common assessments, because it's a lot. So